Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? We have some banging quarterback matchups this week, and we're going to be diving into all of those, plus the quarterbacks you probably shouldn't be risking with my game-by-game analysis for this week's quarterback start and sit video. And if I look a little worse for the wear, I apologize. We're in the middle of our youth football playoffs. We won our round one game, and I can't shave until we get knocked out or win a championship. But hopefully my playoff beard can bring a little luck to all of you as well. I wouldn't say I'm superstitious, but I am a little stitious. And also, before we start talking about all the quarterbacks this week, I gotta remind everybody of the awesome giveaway that we're doing right now for signing up over on Underdog. If you would be interested in winning this full-size framed autographed Jonathan Taylor jersey, all you need to do is head on over to Underdog or download the app, create a new account using code word headliners, and make a deposit of at least $10. Once you do that and complete your first contest over on Underdog, you're automatically going to be entered into the drawing for this jersey. But on top of that, you're going to get some goodies as well, because Underdog is going to give you a deposit bonus of up to $1,000. And you're also going to get a super special pick'em that's almost guaranteed to hit. In fact, these are some quarterbacks this week that I absolutely love, with some projections over on Underdog that I feel like we could go over on every single one of them. You could take any number of these quarterbacks that you're also loving this week, pair it with your free pick'em, and absolutely dominate your first week over on Underdog. But if you're already on Underdog, that's awesome. Take all the information provided in the video, match it up with which players you like on this lineup the best, and include them in your own lineups for a huge week. But Thursday Night Football with Spencer Rattler and Bo Nix may not be where we want to run to if we need fantasy points. I know there are some times when Bo Nix's fantasy numbers look all right, but realistically, they're not that good at all. This past week against the Chargers, he didn't even start putting up fantasy points until the fourth quarter, where all of his production came when they were already down by 20 plus points. The play calling is bad. The structure of the offense is bad. Bo Nix doesn't have a ton of upside, and a lot of his fantasy points are coming later in the game when it's garbage time and he's facing backups or defenses that are just doing prevent. I will give Spencer Rattler some props for not looking all that bad last week. He kind of had a bad rap coming out of college and while he was in college, but if he can keep this up, he definitely could be next in line for whenever Derek Carr is done in New Orleans. But this Denver defense is inside the top 10 of fewest fantasy points, passing touchdowns, and passing yards allowed to quarterbacks this season. And they may be without Patrick Surtain, but that doesn't make this matchup any less difficult for Spencer Rattler. They still have a lot of really good players on defense, and Rattler just doesn't have the floor that I would be interested in trying to start. Drake Maye looked outstanding in his first start last week, and over in London going against this Jacksonville defense, he could have another solid week to go along with it. Jacksonville is currently allowing the most touchdowns and fantasy points to the quarterback position and the second most pass yards. And Houston's defense is tougher than this Jacksonville defense. Over in London, Drake Maye could have a really solid second game of his career. New England's defense is currently allowing the 7th most passing yards to quarterbacks. And Trevor Lawrence this season hasn't had a whole lot of upside. And when you take a look at Trevor Lawrence and you think about Trevor Lawrence, you think about potential upside. But realistically, we should be looking at the floor instead. He's not turning the ball over all that much, but he's also having difficulty completing passes. That's what it's going to take to see a higher upside, like a couple of weeks ago. But last week is where that floor comes into play and the ceiling just isn't attainable. Geno Smith is another quarterback that should be looked at for his floor more often than he should be looked at for his ceiling. Since week 2, he's crossed 40 passing attempts in every game but one. But the ceiling has been lower because he has 6 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. And when you turn the ball over that much, unfortunately, you're losing fantasy points and you're knocking down that ceiling consistently. If we were to take away even 3 of those interceptions, he would have at least 2 more top 12 finishes at the quarterback position. But unfortunately, he's finding himself finishing as a high quarterback too, more times than not. After a huge Thursday night football game, his performance in week 6 was a little bit more mediocre. Only 225 passing yards and 1 touchdown. But part of that was because they didn't need to throw the ball that much going up against Carolina. In this matchup against Seattle, their defense has been up and down. They looked really good to start the season against some quarterbacks that weren't all that great. And since then, they've had a little bit more trouble stopping the pass. This week against Kirk Cousins, he definitely has a solid floor, but his ceiling could be a little bit lower if any turnovers are caused. At this point, we just kind of have to scratch Will Levis off of our starter list, and maybe you were utilizing him in Superflex or 2 quarterback leagues, and if that were the case, I would probably be looking for someone with a little safer floor as well. He just keeps making too many mistakes, and the decisions he's making in the pocket are not all that great. Now, this is a really tough Tennessee defense, especially the secondary, so Josh Allen does bring a little bit of risk this week. But you're still going to start him with Amari Cooper now there and the help on the outside to open some things up and maybe make life a little bit easier for Josh Allen. He definitely has all the upside in the world as a top 3 quarterback because he's probably going to find the end zone with his feet. But the passing game may be a little bit lower this week, so unfortunately, there's a little bit of risk. Joe Burrow had a little bit of a slower week 6, but don't let those numbers fool you from the fact that that game snapped a streak of 4 straight games with 2 or more passing touchdowns. And he's still only thrown 2 interceptions on the year. I know when Joe Burrow goes against Cleveland, there's a little bit of a history of him not being able to get the win. But this right now is a must win against Cleveland, and they need it to get back on track if they want their playoff hopes to stay alive. I already wasn't in love with Deshaun Watson this week, but now that they've traded his number 1 wide receiver, he becomes my Mando must-avoid player for the quarterback position in week 7. Another week and another game of under 200 passing yards, and now his best weapon at wide receiver is gone. I love David Njoku this week, but really all the production that Deshaun Watson puts up may only be to David Njoku. And while Mando's deodorant can help you escape odors for up to 72 hours, all it takes is 3 seconds to get Deshaun Watson out of your lineup and escape the stinker of a game that he's probably going to have. And right now, if you head on over to Shop Mando and use code word headliners, you're going to get $5 off their starter kit, which essentially is 40% of the price. And if you find yourself super busy, especially with the holidays coming up, Mando's going to be a lifesaver for you. Unfortunately, I don't think them or anybody else is going to save Deshaun Watson. Even without Nico Collins, CJ Stroud could be in for a big week going up against Green Bay's defense that's currently allowing the 6th most passing yards on the season and 10 passing touchdowns to quarterbacks. Now, they do cause interceptions, and if they can get CJ Stroud to turn the ball over, his ceiling is going to come down a little bit. But CJ Stroud has a prime opportunity with Stefon Diggs and Tank Dell to take advantage of this secondary and put up a bigger game than what a lot of other quarterbacks may see this week. Houston's defense is a little bit of the opposite right now because they have allowed the 6th fewest passing yards to opposing quarterbacks. However, they are allowing the 4th most passing touchdowns, and Jordan Love has at least 2 touchdown passes in every healthy game this season. So maybe Jordan Love doesn't put up a ton of yards this week, but he should find the end zone a couple of times. If you like risk, then the Miami and Indianapolis game is going to be exactly for you. Because the Colts are allowing the 5th most passing yards to quarterbacks right now. But Tyler Huntley is going to be the starter, and he's yet to find the end zone in his 2 starts. And for Indianapolis, we don't even know who the starter is going to be as of yet. Joe Flacco could end up being a solid bet this week, but Miami doesn't allow a ton of fantasy points either. For as bad as their offense has been, their defense is allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to the quarterback position right now. If Anthony Richardson plays, there is a lot of risk with him. If Joe Flacco plays, that floor gets a little bit better, but I'm not exactly sure where the ceiling would end up being. The key for both quarterbacks in this matchup is to limit their turnovers. Minnesota is currently allowing the 8th most passing yards on the season, but they have 11 interceptions. The Lions are right in the middle of the pack on how many yards they allow to quarterbacks right now, but they also have 7 interceptions on the season. So really in this matchup for Jared Goff and Sam Darnold, protect the football. The numbers are going to come. The pass defense for both of these teams absolutely can bend, and they can give up quite a few yards. But you've got to finish in the end zone. If you finish with interceptions, it's going to kill your fantasy day. The Giants defense can be tough at times, but Jalen Hurts has his main weapons back, and that's really going to help his floor moving forward with the addition of any rushing yards that he can give us. So some of those inconsistencies that we saw at the beginning of the season should iron themselves out moving forward, and Jalen Hurts won't be nearly as up and down as what we saw. If you take a look at Daniel Jones's fantasy numbers, they're actually not all that awful right now. He's thrown for over 200 yards in each of his last 4 games, and he's got 2 passing touchdowns in 3 of his 6 games this season. But Daniel Jones is to quarterbacks what Taysom Hill is to tight ends. He's going to give you some really good fantasy numbers someday, and then it's going to be like he disappears other days. As of this recording, it appears Aidan O'Connell will be starting again for the Las Vegas Raiders. And if you think about it rationally, for him to be a quarterback 1, he would probably need 200 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, and that would be without the turnovers. If you think he can get that, then you can fire him up. If you don't think that he can get that, then he needs to be left on the bench. Stafford to me is a lot like Geno Smith. He's been over 200 passing yards in every single game this season, but 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, which is really killing his ceiling. So if you're starting Stafford, like a couple of the other quarterbacks we've talked about, you're starting him for his floor and not his upside. This is the type of matchup where Andy Dalton could have one of those huge Andy Dalton days. It's probably going to be some negative game script going up against a defense that is going to give up quite a few passing yards and has already this season. But it's all about limiting turnovers. If Andy Dalton starts tossing the ball to the Washington Commanders more than his own team, he's not even fantasy viable. But if he limits the turnovers, let's say 1 at most, he's going to be a top 12 option this week. But he does have at least 1 interception in each of his last 3 games. So let's try to bring that down a little bit and find all the ceiling that we possibly can. I mean, there's not much to discuss about Jayden Daniels anymore. He has found his way into that upper echelon of fantasy quarterbacks that you really don't consider sitting, regardless of the matchup. But you know what? He's got a great matchup this week. The only issues that arise with Carolina are either running the football consistently so you don't have to pass, or getting up by so much that it limits your upside and you don't really get a whole lot of fantasy points in the second half. Patrick Mahomes has yet to be a quarterback 1 in any game this season. That's got to be insane to hear. He also has at least 1 interception in every single game this year. He's just turning the ball over, and we're not seeing those big yardage games that we're used to with Patrick Mahomes. And because of that, the ceiling just hasn't been there all season long. In this matchup against San Francisco, we probably won't see any more or any less than what he's already given us. And Brock Purdy has only been slightly better than Patrick Mahomes. He's got 2 QB1 finishes on the season, but that's all as well. So for Brock Purdy and Patrick Mahomes, they're both being started for their floors right now. They're not quarterbacks that you're losing your week because of. But if you're looking for high upside plays, Patrick Mahomes is not the guy. And in this matchup, Brock Purdy may not be either. I gotta say, I don't get it, Pittsburgh. What's the point in changing your quarterback situation when you're 4-2 right now and your quarterback hasn't been an issue? Not only that, but it's the New York Jets who are currently allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points, 3rd fewest touchdowns, and 3rd fewest passing yards to quarterbacks. I can tell you what, I don't want anything to do with Russell Wilson this week. And maybe we'll find a little bit more upside with Aaron Rodgers now that he has Davante Adams back. And I do believe Davante Adams is going to end up playing this week, but we'll keep an eye on that as the week goes. If he's got Davante Adams, Aaron Rodgers may be a little bit closer to low risk for me. If there's no Davante Adams, this is still going to be a tougher matchup. That pressure from Pittsburgh could end up causing some turnovers or some bad throws from Aaron Rodgers. The more reinforcements he has, the more upside he has. This should end up being a big matchup for both quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield should be firmly inside the top 10, if not the top 5 this week. Tampa Bay is allowing the 2nd most fantasy points and 4th most passing yards to quarterbacks. Baltimore is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 5th most touchdowns to quarterbacks, and the most passing yards to quarterbacks. If you got Baker Mayfield or Lamar Jackson, fire them up. If you've got both of them, ask your commissioner to turn it into a Superflex league. Justin Herbert hasn't shown a ton of upside this season, but this is a good enough matchup for him that he could finally find himself with just a little bit more ceiling than what we've been accustomed to. But he definitely has a safe floor this week, so if you find yourself needing to ride with Justin Herbert, it's possible that he could help you through the week. Kyler Murray, on the other hand, could definitely be in for a tough week. The Chargers defense is absolutely legit, and last week they smothered the Denver Broncos until late in the game when finally they just started playing prevent and some of their starters were making their way off the field. This is an awful matchup for Kyler Murray, and as of right now, we don't know if he's going to have Marvin Harrison Jr. back. Yo, Headliner Nation, hopefully you got all the information that you needed to make your quarterback decisions from this video. But don't forget, we're going to have rankings coming out. We're going to have our live ranking show Friday afternoon. We'll be live Saturday night, and there's tons of content throughout the rest of the week. So if you're not a subscriber, subscribe right now. If you don't have the bell notifications turned on, do that right now. And then you won't miss any of the content that we drop throughout the entire week. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.